being here for Ethics of Storytelling. Give yourselves a round of applause for showing up. It's always half the battle, right? We're really excited to have all of you here. Some of our friends are here, some new friends are here. This is really exciting. This panel is incredible. They've been speaking to me on a thread and email, so to see them in person is special for me. I hope it's as special for you guys. I'm Charlotte Glasser. I'm moderating today's panel, and I need to cop to the fact that this topic was misinterpreted by me when I originally signed on. So I'm extra interested in learning more about it than I already have. So this is going to be great for all of us as newbies to the topic, and some of you are more proficient than others, specifically our panelists who are here today. So joining me now to discuss ethics in storytelling is Gretchen Ellis, a writer, podcaster, and media critic. So please say hello to Gretchen. Elizabeth Bridges, professor at Rhodes College in Memphis, where she teaches German and comparative literature. Yeah. Very good. Yeah. And Heather Hogan, who is a senior editor at Autostraddle.com. Maybe you guys have heard of it. I'm the creative director for the Vintage Brands, which is a jewelry, watches, and handbag boutique in Malibu, California. And I'm also the partner for Hot Rabbit New York, one of New York's largest LGBTQ dance party and event production companies. Wow. So if you guys want to get down when you're on the East Coast, please let me know. Yeah. So without further ado, I want to get right into this. Actually, this topic came from Gretchen. The panel grew out of some writing that she did about the Lexa debacle and evolved into media more generally. And so I want to ask Gretchen first, let's kick it off with you, but let's have a discussion amongst all of us. What kind of ethics questions did the killing of Lexa raise for you?
Well, the reason that I thought of this was very much surrounding the way that the entire creative team behind The 100 was engaging with the audience. Was really what this grew out of, was the idea that they purposefully sought out queer communities. They went into queer spaces, pretended they were not actually, they pretended they were part of queer spaces. And then encouraged everyone, oh, it's fine, don't worry about it, everything's gonna be great, you'll love it, just, tune in, Lexa's not going anywhere. And then to follow that up on killing off this character that you purposefully sought out a community to watch, my reaction was like, that is extremely unethical. That is wrong to purposefully seek out an audience, lie to them about what you're going to do, and then drop it, and drop this bomb on them, and then expect backlash. So that was what it came from, and then started thinking about, can we start talking about just ethics more generally? Like, this is one specific unethical situation, but no one's really having a conversation about how media impacts people. Media has power, stories have power, and if something has power, we have to talk about how we handle that, both as creators and as participants within these media. Someone has to start this conversation. So that was really what it all came out of for me.
That actually leads me right into the question I had to follow that up, which is the Lexa debacle being the heart of the responsibility that artists have to their audiences. What is that responsibility that they have? Let's go into the depth of what you were saying more clearly.
Well, I mean, if you're going to talk about ethics and storytelling, then you have to ask yourself first, are there cultural repercussions for bad storytelling? Are there cultural repercussions for depicting minorities in ways that are damaging? And the answer is obviously yes, right? Like, throughout the history of time, from the very beginning of recorded stories, our perception of people who are not like us is shaped by the stories that people tell. And, I had the amazing experience to speak to some teenagers at high school recently, and I asked, we were talking about media representation, and I said, where have you seen trans women on TV? And they were like, Law and Order, SVU, all of them, right? Right? And it's just, the ethics of storytelling are so important because, especially when you're talking about queer people, this is a hugely important thing right now. In 2008, GLAAD started measuring marriage equality against the number of gay characters on television, right? And what they found out, year by year, there is a direct increase. Every year, 0.5% more characters were lesbian, gay, and bisexual, and every year, 2% more Americans supported marriage equality. And when GLAAD called and they said, hey, why do you all of a sudden support marriage equality? They were like, well, because of Kurt Hummel, they saw these TV characters come into their life, they became like real people to them, and they were like, I think Santana and Brittany should be able to get married, it becomes very real to you. So yes, like, if a story, the worst thing a storyteller can say is like, it's just a story. Like, it's not just a fucking story. There's no such thing as just a story. And so if it's true, and it is true, then we can start talking about like, okay, then what is the responsibility of the storyteller?
Right. I will get slightly, I guess, maybe slightly technical here. My background is in linguistics primarily. And so stories matter partly because of the way our brain functions. Like, our brain is incredibly lazy. It is, and that is because it is much more efficient for your brain to be lazy. And the way I think, like, stories create what I call meaning pathways. Both linguistically, if you think about, what is a word could have 5 different meanings. Well, how do you know which it means in context? Is your brain remembers, well, this word is used in this context, this other word is used in this other one. And the more common words or meanings are going to have the deepest ruts in your brain. And so those are going to be harder to change. But we know that they can change because the more you interact with a new meaning, a new story, it wears away at that deep rut, and suddenly you can change the meaning of something the more you interact with a new interpretation of it. And that's why stories matter, because we can change the way people think. This is how our brains function. We know it scientifically. This is how things work. And so that is why stories matter, because stories literally change the way that your brain functions and what you think about. And so if we can start telling more and more stories about ourselves, I love that you just brought that up, that like we change minds by telling new stories and people interacting with those stories in new ways over a span of time.
And that brings us to is this on?
It is, yes.
Okay. That brings us to the concept of the trope, obviously, as well, because that's a term from literary studies, and that's these little pieces of stories that authors of literature have used for ages that we all know and love, some of them, such as the meet cute, that we know from movies, that the couple has to be each other some way. And so there are these little shortcuts, kind of the same sort of pathways,
Right, yeah.
that we have little pieces of stories that we can kind of think of the same way as words almost, that have little snippets of meaning. And the sort of opposite problem, that it's hard to change those ruts that have formed once they've already formed.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's kind of the problem that we have with these tropes, is they've already been worn over for so many years. And so to actually create the capacity to change that, I think that's kind of what we're talking about here at the con in general.
Right, and if you're not, I think what people also fail to realize is if you're not subverting the story, you're in some sense reintegrating that story. If you're not consciously subverting a story, your brain is just automatically going to keep going down that pathway that it has established.
Right, I mean, like, how did Donald Trump get elected? He got elected by telling the story that we see on TV, and then the story that Fox News repeats over and over and over again. When we see black men on television, 94% of the time, they're criminals, right? And so then you get Donald Trump saying black on black crime. Or when you see, the New York Times did this article a couple days after the election, where they had all of these people who write Muslim characters, and all of them write Muslim characters as terrorists. And they were like, do you feel a responsibility about this? And they were like, well, the network wants terrorists, and they want them to be Muslim, right? So, like, if you're not subverting it, exactly what you're saying, you're allowing these monstrous situations to rise up. And if you, for example, if you live in the middle of the country and you don't know any Muslim people, and so all you see on TV is Muslim terrorists, and then you get Fox News every time they're showing a person who's a Muslim, calling them a terrorist, radical Islamic terrorism or whatever. It's just continuing to feed into that rut, and it just gets deeper and deeper and deeper. And so it feels, even though it's not the truth, it feels like the truth to you because it's a lie that's just been told over and over and over again.
Yeah, the absence of contradiction is in some sense a reinforcement.
Right.
So if you never see happy, like even if you like write a queer character who like, if you're not giving them a happy ending, you're not consciously subverting the idea that queer people always have tragic stories. Like if you just say, well, like, but they just have a neutral story. I'm like, yeah, but that still reinforces the idea that like queer people do not have happy endings. Like, and that's, I think, what people fail to recognize, that the absence of contradiction is a reinforcement of the trope, of the already established meaning. And that, like we keep saying, that's why this is important, because there are established tropes, especially attached to queer people. And if we're not consciously subverting them, we're just reinforcing the tropes that already exist.
That's what makes it a trope, this accrual over time.
Yeah.
It's not
Yeah.
that any particular artist is participating in a trope, it's just that either the absence of subverting it or actively contributing to it, just the act of making the characters do this automatically contributes to it, whether they have any intention behind it or not. And I think that's something that I actually want to get to in the panel today is this, for instance, and I'm going to say the Rothenberg word, but where the quasi or pseudo apology tour that he went on. Yes, we all remember. In the press after the 307, where he pseudo apologized and talked about his intention behind what he was trying to do with that episode. And the thing about that is that whatever the author's intention was doesn't really matter because the impact is greater than the intent. It's always the case. And so whatever his intention might have been of, not baiting the audience or whatever, because I think he obviously is not going to use the term queer baiting, because we all would have really jumped on that. Saying he was not trying to bait the audience, well, that doesn't matter because we were baited. And that was the effect that happened. And so, whatever his intention was irrelevant because that's what happened.
Right, like what we're saying is that once a trope becomes established, it's just so easy to fall into the trope, right? So, like, Lexa was really the turning point. There were a lot of factors that made Lexa the turning point, but when Lexa died, after Lexa, 24 more characters have died since then. 24 more lesbian and bisexual characters have died since then. And in the total of history of lesbian and bisexual women on TV, there have been 172 who have died. So 24 in the last year. So that's 15% of all deaths just in the last year, just since Lexa died. And so the thing is that it just becomes so common. And we saw this after Lexa's death where all of these characters died and these showrunners are like, we didn't know about Lexa yet. Nobody really knew, but like you knew that lesbians were continuing to die and bisexual women were continuing to die. And choosing not to subvert that at some point luckily reached its breaking point, and sadly, we've lost a lot of characters since then.
But that's why we're all here.
Exactly.
Right. Where does that leave the responsibility for artists, since so many have happened in 2016 and even before and after that?
Well, I think when you have an established trope like barrier gaze, because whether they want to acknowledge it or even understand it or not, barrier gaze has existed for close to 100 years. This is not a brand new trope. This was a trope primarily in literature, especially in the middle of the 20th century, where there was a lot of censorship in written media, things like comic books and written novels, where it was okay to depict a gay man or a lesbian woman so long as they did not get a happy ending. And the reason that existed was because giving them a happy ending was an endorsement. It meant that this was now an okay thing for the children to do, and they were just not okay with that. And so it was like, fine, have a lesbian romance, but both of them have to have some kind of tragic ending. Typically what would happen is a lot of times the lesbian character would get killed off, and then the other woman, who is probably bisexual, might go crazy. She might also die, or she might end up married to a man. And so and that was where barrier gaze came out of, was this idea that stories about non-heterosexual characters had to have a tragic ending. They had to die. Otherwise, it would be like telling kids it's okay to be non-straight. And this has existed for a long time. So whether these creators want to say they didn't mean it, this was an established trope before Lexa. This is not Lexa's fault that this trope exists. Right. It existed for 70 years.
And it wasn't you're not saying it was just sort of generally accepted. I mean, it was literally if you wanted the stamp of approval from the Comics Code Authority, you had to follow the written rule, and the written rule was no gay characters with happy endings.
Yeah.
And allow me to plug my presentation I'm going to be doing tomorrow about this very subject, which I'm going to talk about queer history even before film and media, and I'll go into some of the origins, even in like the legal medical community that led up to film history. So. Anyway, where do
So
we
all
go
that's
from
to
here?
all that to say is they are responsible precisely because this is a well-established trope. And as we've been saying, well-established tropes, if you are not contradicting it, you are reinforcing it. And they're not just reinforcing it by lack of contradiction. They are actively participating in this trope, whether they consciously realized that that is what they were doing. They were writing a story that is a part of an established trope that is harmful to our community, whether they say they knew about it or beforehand or not. It's like, so what? So what if you didn't know about this? This is a trope that has existed for long enough that it is actively damaging.
So let's take the conversation to the writer's room. We talked about this a little bit, but TV relies on a collaborative writer's room. So what kinds of problems does that lead to? If this has existed for so long, where are we right now?
Well, this is another one where I'd like to bring in a historical perspective, because I think that the writer's room, obviously television is a collaborative medium. There is no such thing as the singular auteur or artiste who makes television, because there has to be a writer's room. There have to be different people contributing, editors, actors, you name it. There is obviously the showrunner, this idea that we have. And some of you might remember last year there was a panel at, I think it was ATX, I'm not sure, but it was called Bury Your Tropes. Okay, I see some nodding heads. And I found that rather disappointing.
Super.
Obviously, Javi was the only person that really had anything kind of progressive to say. And who was it? The L word lady? Highly Chagan. Okay. Yeah. And
Maybe some of you are familiar with that show.
perhaps. And I was expecting to hear some things from her, but basically everybody but Javi on that panel sort of stuck with this idea of the singular artistic vision, this idea of artistic integrity, which is honestly rooted in the idea of the artist that we've inherited from the Renaissance. Because that's when the artist was the painter or the sculptor, and that's when artists started signing their name to works. And that's when we developed this idea of the artist with the singular vision, with this divine gift from God, and that's where we have our idea of the artist. And so fast forward to 2016 or 2017, and so these showrunners sort of have inherited this idea of the artist, and they see themselves as these folks with a divine gift and singular vision. They probably don't say it like that in their minds, but I mean that's kind of this cultural idea that we have.
But I mean, they do say it, right? Like even the Rothenberg word was like, well, I thought that I was going to do it differently. And like you see that in writers' rooms, specifically when it's a male showrunner, you see them say, well, I thought like my thing was going to be so different than the other 172 lesbian and bisexual characters that were killed.
Fair point.
and then when you have like women showrunners like Marlene King and Ellen Chaikin, their thing is sort of like, well, but I'm a lesbian, so I can kill whoever I want. Like, right? Like it's
Still the trope.
Yeah.
And then you have like Ryan Murphy, who's the confluence of both of those things, which is like I'm a gay man, so I can just piss on literally everybody.
Well, I mean, yeah, we see artists say it all the time. They talk about, well, like, this is my story and I need to tell it. I need to be true to my story. I need to be true to my vision. And I have a lot of very choice words that I won't say here for people who say that to me, because, like, who I see say that, because it's nonsense. It's not, like, you are crafting a story for an audience. Like, you are making a story that people will watch. And I think especially with television, like, the point of television is to like make money for the network. Like, this isn't just I am an artist painting my work of art that maybe hopefully someday will end up in a museum. Like, they're creating media that exists to entertain, for the audience to interact with and engage with. And to try and take that, they're imposing a vision and a perception of art that does not fit in this medium. Film and television are not the same as a person sitting down and creating a single person creating a single work of art. And we, like, I get so frustrated and kind of wordless about it, that, like, we cannot allow them that conception to continue, because it ends up with, they believe that they don't have to listen to their audience, or even to other people in the same writer's room.
Very, very, very similar simple solution to this problem is to put queer people and people of color and trans people and non-binary people in your writer's room, and that way you've got, and you need more than one black woman in a writer's room, because black women are not a monolith. You need a variety of voices. I don't know if you guys are watching One Day at a Time. It's a new Netflix sitcom. You know why it's so good? It's because they have brought so many diverse, authentic perspectives in. I'm just going to plug my website, Autostraddle.com, and tell you that one of our senior editors, Yvonne Marquez, recently interviewed the writers who did the lesbian storyline on the show, and one of them is a Latino woman, and one of them is just a lesbian. They're 20 years apart, just a lesbian. But it's interesting because when she talked to them, they're like 20 years apart, but their cultural canon for lesbian and bisexual characters is the same. Like, who's your favorite? Willow. Like, we don't. It doesn't matter how old you are as a queer woman, because there are so few stories, we've seen them all. Yeah. And so bringing these voices into your writer's room and having them there and then letting them tell their stories from their authentic perspective is the way that you avoid having a straight white dude be like, I've got to be true to my vision of this black trans woman. Like, no, you don't. That's not your vision. It's not your perspective.
Right, I was going to say, because you also have to be willing to listen to them and not just put them on your room for like brownie points. Be like, see, it's fine. I have a lesbian on my writing team. Everything's cool. It's like, well, but did you actually take their perspective into account? Did you actually listen to them? Did you let them do it? Or did you write your version and say, hey, here, put your rubber stamp on it because I'm in charge, and if you don't, then you can get fired.
Yeah, and the thing where you're just like, well, a lesbian told me it was okay. Oh, well, she does definitely speak for all lesbians.
Well, and that's what I mean about this model of the artist, because like on the ATX panel, then we have Eileen Chaikin saying this stuff, and it's okay because I'm a lesbian. Well, no, it's not. Mm-hmm. And so, not only do we have to have this diverse team of people working on these projects, but then there also has to be a really different model of how art is created. And it has, and frankly, obviously the one that we've inherited as the singular artiste or whatever is not a feminist model. It's not. And so we need something that is truly collaborative. And when you're talking about something like One Day at a Time, for example, I think we see the results of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And, it's been pretty successful.
Yeah, and think about One Day at a Time. It is a multi-camera sitcom with a laugh track. It should feel like it is 150 years old, and it feels like the most fresh new thing you've ever seen in your entire life. Even though it's a very old model of storytelling, it's told in a brand new way. It's so exciting.
What makes it different from others similar to it?
Well, they brought a whole bunch of people of color, like Latino and Latina people, into the writer's room to tell a story about a Cuban-American family of immigrants. They brought, they're telling a story centered on a single mom who's a woman of color. Her daughter